What happens when he discovered an ancient Apache trading route and the tribe demanded control of his ranch? Witness this unbelievable true-inspired story right here on Whisper of the Past. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Let's get started. Tom Henderson had spent his entire life savings on 500 acres of rugged Arizona land. The dusty property stretched across red rock canyons and mesquite-covered hills, a place where civilization seemed like a distant memory. For Tom, a former construction worker from Phoenix, this wasn't just a real estate investment. It was his dream, his retirement plan, his slice of the American West where he could finally build the cattle ranch he'd always imagined. The first few months were backbreaking work. Tom spent dawn to dusk clearing brush, fixing fences, and mapping out where his homestead would stand. He hired local contractors, invested in basic infrastructure, and began planning his modest cattle operation. Everything seemed to be falling into place until that sweltering afternoon in late June. Tom was surveying the northern boundary of his property, machete in hand, cutting through dense vegetation that hadn't been touched in decades. That's when he noticed something unusual. Beneath the overgrowth, there were stones arranged in deliberate patterns. Not random geological formations, but carefully placed rocks that formed what looked like an ancient pathway. His curiosity piqued. Tom began following the trail. The stone markers led him deeper into the canyon, winding through natural corridors in the rock face. After nearly 2 hours of hiking, he discovered something that made his breath catch. Carved into the canyon walls were petroglyphs, ancient symbols depicting human figures, animals, and geometric patterns that seemed to tell stories from centuries past. Tom photographed everything. Back at his temporary trailer that evening, he researched what he'd found. The markings matched descriptions of Apache trail markers. The pathway appeared to be part of an ancient trading route that indigenous peoples had used for hundreds, possibly thousands of years to move goods between settlements and across territorial boundaries. Excited by his discovery, Tom did what he thought was the right thing. He contacted the state archaeological department and the local Apache tribal council, sharing his findings and offering to work with them to preserve this piece of history. He imagined collaborative efforts, maybe even a small museum or educational center on his land. He saw it as adding value to his property while honoring the past. The response was not what he expected. Within 2 weeks, Tom received a formal letter from legal representatives of the Apache Nation. The communication was polite but firm. The trading route he had discovered was not just an archaeological curiosity. It was sacred ground, a pathway their ancestors had walked for generations, connecting their people to their spiritual and cultural heritage. The letter informed him that the tribe was asserting ancestral rights to the land and requesting control over the property where the route was located. Tom was stunned. He'd purchased the land legally, paid fair market value, and held a clear title. How could anyone claim rights to property he owned outright? But as lawyers began explaining the complex web of federal Indian law, historical treaties, and cultural preservation statutes, Tom realized he'd stumbled into something far more complicated than a simple real estate transaction. The Apache representatives explained that the trading route wasn't merely a historical path. It was part of their living culture, still used in ceremonial practices and central to their identity as a people. Some tribal elders claimed the route was protected under religious freedom laws and that its desecration or privatization violated sacred traditions. They argued that previous land transfers had occurred without proper consultation with the tribe and that historical injustices meant the original sale of tribal lands to the federal government was itself problematic. Tom found himself caught between two Americas. One that promised property rights and individual ownership, and another that recognized the prior claims and continuing connection of indigenous peoples to ancestral lands. The local community quickly divided. Some neighbors supported Tom, seeing the tribal claim as governmental overreach. Others sympathized with the Apache perspective, acknowledging centuries of displacement and broken promises. The legal battle that followed consumed Tom's life. Tribal lawyers filed motions in federal court seeking to establish that the trading route constituted a traditional cultural property deserving protection. They presented historical evidence, oral histories, and expert testimony from anthropologists about the route's significance. Tom's attorneys countered that property rights couldn't be retroactively invalidated based on historical use and that he'd purchased the land in good faith through proper legal channels. Media attention intensified the conflict. News crews arrived at Tom's ranch, framing the story as a clash between progress and preservation, individual rights versus collective memory. Tom found himself portrayed alternately as a victim of bureaucratic overreach and as an interloper on stolen land. Neither characterization felt accurate to him. He was just a man who'd bought property and discovered something unexpected. As months passed and legal fees mounted, Tom's dream ranch became a nightmare. He couldn't develop the land while litigation was pending. Banks grew nervous about lending him operational capital with clouded title issues. His savings evaporated into attorney retainers and court filings. The cattle operation he'd planned remained a fantasy as the northern 40 acres of his property, where the trading route ran, became a legal battleground. Representatives from the tribe reached out for mediation. In a conference room far from the contested canyons, Tom sat across from Apache elders and tribal council members. They shared stories he'd never heard in history classes. Tales of forced relocations, of landscapes that held the memories of their people, of sacred places that couldn't be replaced or compensated for with money. They showed him how the trading route connected to still living traditions, how it was walked during coming-of-age ceremonies, how it represented an unbroken thread to ancestors who had survived against impossible odds. Tom listened, really listened, perhaps for the first time. He began to understand that what he saw as property, they experienced as identity. But he also shared his own story, his working-class roots, his decades of labor, his modest dream that wasn't about wealth but about independence and purpose. Neither side was wrong. Both were right, and that was precisely the problem. The case remains unresolved as it winds through federal appeals courts. Tom still owns the ranch on paper, but questions hang over that northern 40 acres like the desert heat. The Apache continue their legal pursuit while also seeking legislative solutions that might establish broader protections for ancestral pathways. Tom Henderson now spends his evenings walking the disputed trail, thinking about the countless feet that passed this way before his. He wonders about the traders who carried turquoise and obsidian, the families who migrated with the seasons, the warriors who ran these paths, and the ceremonies held under these same stars. His anger has given way to something more complex, a recognition that ownership might be more complicated than a deed in a county courthouse. This story asks us uncomfortable questions about history, justice, and reconciliation. When does the past end and the present begin? Can wounds centuries old still demand healing? And what does it mean to truly own a piece of earth that has belonged to so many before? The trading route remains, as it has for generations, a path through the red stone canyons. Whether it leads forward or backward, to resolution or continued conflict, no one yet knows. Thank you for watching Whisper of the Past. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales from history. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Where do you stand on this complex issue? Until next time, remember that the past is never truly past, it walks beside us still.